Hi everyone, this is Dwayne here from Townshend Xlights, and I thought I would do a video on what you need to get started in this hobby, especially if you want to do everything DIY and you want to do everything on a budget. I'm all about doing it on a budget, and some of the tools that I'm about to show you are budget tools. They do a perfectly good job because they're not really getting put under pressure. So please withhold comments about the cheapness of the tools, because some of these tools are over 8 years old and they were cheap and nasty tools at the time, and they're still lasting to this very day. So I thought what we'll do is, being new to the hobby can be all very confusing. Some people will go out and buy the most expensive tools when they don't need to. So let's start off. You're going to need to put your tools in something. So this old toolbox here, this is almost 50 years old. It belonged to my father, so it has huge sentimental value, and when he passed away we didn't have a use for it, so I've decided to use it to hold all my tools that are for the Christmas display. So when I need to go and service the display out in the yard, I can just pick up this toolbox, go out there, and I've got everything with me. So some of the more basic tools to start with are things like pliers. Now you can go small pliers, large pliers. I preferred to go with both. See what I mean? Like these were left out in the rain. They're still perfectly fine. They close absolutely perfectly if it'll focus, and they do a really good job. These were budget. These are probably coming up to 4 years old, and except for the fact that handle is slipping, which I've now just fixed, because they're doing such fine work, it doesn't matter. So that's those. Side cutters, once again. So these ones here, these are bordering on maybe 4 years old. They're still just as sharp today as they were. One thing I like about these ones, see that hole, so hang on, let's see if I'll put it on. See those two holes? They are wire stripping holes. So if you need to, you can actually put the wire through those and strip them, but we'll talk about wire strippers separately. So it's good. I've actually got 3 different kinds of pliers. There's those ones, there's a little baby pair, and a big chunky pair, which I hardly ever use for this sort of project, but you know, always handy to have. Right, next up we've got screwdrivers. So once again we've got the little posi drive or Phillips screwdrivers. So there's a small one. I also have slightly bigger ones if necessary. Then we've got a little poker. Now the reason I have the poker, this is great for making marks in the core flute, which we'll talk about a little later on. And of course the good old flat blade. Now I've got an assortment of screwdrivers. I've got screwdrivers coming out of everywhere, so these are just a few that I use in here. That means I've still got others in the car, in my workshop inside, and so forth. On top of that, then we're going to need the actual, so those are just general tools and generic tools. You can pick those up from, you know, anywhere. Like I say, budget ones work perfectly fine. Look after them and they will last you. Then we've got things like cable ties. Right, so I've got different breeds, different colors. I use the yellow ones to actually mark props, and like different sizes, like small ones and whatnot. And I just collect those through the years. Through the year, I've got such a stash of those, it's not funny. I like to also have an assortment of pencils, once again for marking core flute and other things. Obviously, you're going to need a tape measure of some kind. So once again, I've got so many of those coming out of every office, it's not funny. Electrical tape. You're going to need some electrical tape. Now, electrical tape is not really for waterproofing or sealing, but it's definitely handy if you are short of anything else and you need something in a pinch. They work perfectly fine. Speaking of sealing, then you've got your heat shrink. So the heat shrink comes in different kinds. This is a regular heat shrink. What I mean by that is, then you've got this one which says dual wall tubing. So this one actually has a thin layer of glue on the inside. See if I can make it focus. It's got a thin layer of glue on the inside, so when you melt this, it seals the join. I'm using that for the second time. I used it last year and it had no waterproofing issue. So use that where possible. Once again, just get a different assortment. I've got the real thin stuff as well. That's good for the individual pixels and soldering onto the pins of controllers and so forth. Another cable tie. Really handy to have when you are building props and testing and whatnot, the little alligator clip extension leads. So I have 4 of those, and I use them in a color-coded order. So anything that's a positive, I use the red. Anything that's negative, ground or neutral, however you want to pronounce it, I use the black, and then I usually use the green for data and the yellow for odd sods. So they're handy when you're just sort of trying to put things together without a permanent connection. Speaking of permanent connections and temporary connections, then you get these little Wago clips. These are awesome for temporary joining something. So these are all the same, so they're not 3-way, these are 1-way. So you got say if I was connecting up power supply, controller and lights, that one of those could all be the positives, one of those could all be the negatives, and then you'll have your data separately. They're really handy as well, instead of using the strips with the screws on top. I mentioned pencils before. Rubber's always a handy thing to have, and I also like to have a range of felt pens for marking stuff of different colors. That's easy, and throw the tube in there as well. Now, to melt the tube, there's a couple of ways to do it. The way that most people do it is they use a flame gun, barbecue lighter type thing. Good in the shed, absolutely terrible out the field when it's windy. This year I'm going to have my heat gun with me because flames will blow out. Speaking of out in the field, it's always handy to have a soldering iron that you can use outside, and this is a gas powered one. This is good outside unless it's windy. That's a pain in the ass, because what happens there is the tip fluctuates with temperature. And yes, this tip needs replacing. I'm just trying to focus it. This tip needs replacing for this year, but it's really handy if I am up on the roof or something. I don't have to run an extension lead up there to use my regular soldering iron. Speaking of soldering irons, this is the one that I use now in my shed. I did have a couple of other ones that have blown up this year for various reasons, and if I tilt this up, all I did was make this board. I have my solder, I have my second set of eyes, I have the foam, which is usually moist, I have the tip cleaner, and then that sits in there like so. I like that because I can take it to projects quite easily. So good soldering iron. That soldering iron is a budget one. It does have an LED light on it, but it's not temperature controlled. I had a temperature controlled one, but I somehow blew it up. It just blew up one day, and that was actually a little bit more expensive than the budget ones. Now the other thing you're going to need is wire strippers. Now you can get wire strippers in different kinds. I really like these ones. You can get the ones that are sideways and they look quite industrial and professional looking. I like these because I'll show you why. Right, we have our pixel lead and our separated item. Some of those other ones can struggle to get in between the two pixels. This is actually a longer than normal. This is what I use on my candy canes and some other items. These are 150 mil, I think, in between the pixels. Normally they're about 70-ish. Don't quote me, but it's pretty close to that. What I like about these ones is you can get in here and you can strip that quite nicely, and it strips it, keeps the wire, so if you're splicing into it, it's a lot easier. Now these ones, these are over 8 years old. These gave up the ghost just the other day after me trying to strip very thick cable that they weren't designed to do. I just thought I'd try to get away with it. So today, being replaced with a brand new pair, and I expect these to last a lot longer. Now, I like these ones. Some people don't. They're not necessarily budget. These weren't budget when I had to buy them, but I do like them a lot. So don't forget, you'll need wire strippers. On top of that, a glue gun is a really handy thing to have. Once again, we just go budget on these. We tend to get a really good run out of it. However, a cordless one would be really handy. That might be in the cards later on. Let's put that up there. And probably the most, well, they're all important tools, but one of the most important is a meter, preferably a digital meter. I use this mainly on the 12 and 5 volts settings, or the DC voltages, as well as the continuity tester, and the ohm tester for testing resistors to find a certain rating. So this is probably coming up to three years or so. I have a hook on it, so it can hook on my pin board, my peg board, or whatever it's called. So meter, really handy thing to have. Electric or battery drill. Battery is obviously a lot easier, you can take it places. If you haven't got one, electric one will do the job, or a little electrified screwdriver would do the job for screws, but if you do need to make holes, you'll need one of those. On top of that, a couple of other things are really handy to have. A headlamp of some kind. I've got this one. Really handy, once again, really handy if you are obviously out in the dark trying to install items. A headlamp is a must do, or if you've got enough light in the yard, you're lucky. I don't. And so I find that really helpful. Don't forget the trusty old knife, a really handy thing to have. So I would say that probably, one more thing. Now, I only recently bought these. This itself, this was a little bit expensive. Terminals. So that's a terminal crimper, and this little container here has hundreds of terminals. These are really handy if you are putting wires into the little wire holders. And you don't want wires to touch, and you want a nice solid connection, so the little terminal goes inside that, and you crunch it down, and that gives you a nice terminated end on a cable. Not a necessity. I've only just recently bought that, used it 5 or 6 times. It does make a tidy job, like so. So there's that red and white cable is using them, and the other two are not, but they do make a real nice, tidy, safe connection. The other things worth having is something that can supply power on the test bench. So what this is a Hewlett-Packard power supply, which is 12 volts by nature. Coming off here it's in disarray at the moment, but coming off here, that wire would be connected into there. This switches it down to 5 volts. I then have 5 volts coming out of here, which I can plug into my little wireless controllers or 5 volt lights, yet still supplying a 12 volt connection for 12 volt lights, an on off switch. I've just had to ransack this for parts, so this is looking a little bit worse for wear. I can make a video on how to make one of these if you like. It's a handy thing to have on the workbench. The other thing to have is a place to put all your odd sods. So in here I've got my ends, I've got my connectors that come off the lights. I sometimes use those for other projects. So for instance, this here plugs into the D1 Mini like so, and then that supplies a voltage to the lights while the D1 Mini gets the power through the USB. So that's one way to get power to some lights. You'll need fuses, always handy to have fuses. That also means you'll have the need for a fuse holder. I use these ones because my local shop only has these. It's pretty useless. This one here, I had to try to mess around with the soldering iron to fix it. That's buggered, but they're usually pretty good. What else do you need? Yeah, that's about it really. So it might seem like a lot of stuff. It's stuff you don't have to rush out and buy straight away. And like I mentioned, it doesn't have to be expensive. You can start budget and work your way up. This is not my first multimeter. This is not my first multimeter. I did have a more budget one, but this one here has proven to be it's worth its weight in gold. I've dropped it a few times. It was a little bit more expensive than what I had before, but it's not an expensive one by any means. So yeah, any questions, leave some comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe, follow the channel. I don't do this for views or subscribes, but I do hope that helps somebody in the future getting into this hobby. there's always questions and someone always has the answers. So if you have any questions, if I can answer them, I'll pop them in the comments. But if you're reading the comments and you have the answer, feel free to answer the questions. Alright, well, that's it everyone. Thanks again, and keep an eye on future videos. See ya.